Sorry. Hi.
Are you starting or me?
Oh, sorry. We're obviously winging it. Cool. Hi. My name is Dora. I'm a content designer at Bankwest, and
I'm Rebecca. I am a user experience designer at Bankwest, and I just want to get started by saying this was not intentional. We did not plan our outfits. We walked into the office and went, shit. So, so we're here to speak to you today about accessible content design and our experiences with inaccessible content and how it has affected sort of our childhoods, I guess, and how we've helped our parents with that. So yeah, I'll pass to Dora to start off.
cool. Yes. So as Beck said, we have the shared experience of having parents that have English as a second language. My parents were immigrants from Poland to Australia. They learnt English, but it was, well, it still is quite broken English. And I had to very quickly become their translator at a young age. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I learnt concepts and adult things, paperwork, banking, whatever, at a pretty young age, and learned how to read and write and all that kind of stuff, which essentially probably shaped my career to where it is today because I have a knowledge of the written word, and became a content designer. Here I am. So what did I do for them? I wrote their letters, I translated for them, I helped them. Now I help them with emails, and I also help them avoid scams as well. Unfortunately, people with English as a second language also are targeted by scammers quite often. And like my dad's always, I've got a blanket rule with my dad at the moment. If he wants to buy anything online, or if he gets any unsolicited SMSs, smishing, or emails, phishing, to send it to me, and then I'll help him sort out if it's a scam or not. I guess that's not directly related to how we design or write content for users, but I guess it just kind of highlights the fact that there is a barrier there in the understanding, and easily identifying what's going on, and that we can actually kind of impact someone's understanding very easily with what we say. So yes, I think over to Beck.
This is a lot louder than your mic. My experience growing up was very similar to Dora's. I was always helping my parents with letters, emails, paperwork, and a lot of complex issues, which are actually really difficult to translate into Auslan. But I also had to make phone calls for them. So I was the one calling Telstra if their phone wasn't working. I was the one, I had really great experiences with Telstra as a kid, but I also was, I was interpreting for parent-teacher interviews, so my parents were always really confused because my reports would say one thing, but the parent-teacher interviews were glowing reviews. But I think the experience of growing up as a coder, a child of deaf adults, is a very unique one because we're assisting our parents with stuff in a language that not a lot of people have a very good understanding of and not a lot of exposure to. So I guess a question for everyone, how much exposure have you guys had to Auslan other than Fiona and her interpreting for Mark McGowan's COVID press conferences? Has anyone had much exposure to Auslan before then? Tiny little bit? Okay. Thought that would be the case, which is fine. It's fine. It's, there is 10,000 people that use Auslan as their primary language in Australia. So it is a tiny, tiny language group. So I thought I'd share some facts for you guys. So Auslan shares 80% of its signs with the Banzel language family. So that's British Sign Language and New Zealand Sign Language. You can tell I don't speak a lot. It's mainly my hands. So they are sort of basically dialects that evolved from an early sign language that was used in the 1800s. But Auslan itself is a dialect, and then there's dialects within Auslan. So there's two distinct dialects, northern and southern. Northern you'll find more in Queensland and New South Wales. Southern, Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania and WA. Northern Territory is kind of a mix of both. But as the language has evolved, now you'll see deaf people who will be able to attribute where someone is from just based on how they sign things. So they'll know if someone's from Perth, they'll know if someone's from Brisbane. It can even get down to specific schools that someone went to because they sign a specific word in a certain way. And then the grammar structure is very, very different. So they follow the clause word order of time, topic, and comment. So instead of saying, I went to the shops with my sister earlier, it would be before I shop with who? My sister. So that leads me into something I'm about to show you now, which is a letter that my mum wrote. My parents are very involved in deaf sports, so that's the context of this letter. But she wrote this letter, and I think it gives a really good idea of how someone who is deaf, but also just has English as a second language, might struggle with written English. So if you want to just have a quick read and see if you can deduce any sort of anything from it, really. This is the pre-edited version. This is also her trying to follow English grammar structure rules, so this is not how she would say it in Auslan. She also doesn't know that I'm using this, so if any of you meet my mum, don't tell her. I don't know how quickly people read. Yeah, so basically why I'm showing you this is because it leads into sort of our next point of why does accessible content matter? Dora?
Hello. Out of interest, is anyone else here a content designer or a copywriter? Oh, yes. 1, 2, 3.
Not from Bankwest.
One not from Bankwest. What about UX? Okay, cool. Okay, great. Other? Cool. Okay, cool. Just wanted to know. So a lot of you will probably have a bit of context around why accessible content matters, obviously, especially the accessibility champions in the room as well. Basically, when we write content, we want to make sure that the information is clear, it's understandable, and that it's clear and understandable for everyone, all individuals, regardless of their background or their abilities. Yes, there it is. It matters because for whatever reason we're creating, obviously someone is on that screen, let's say, assumedly, website or app. They're there to make a choice, or they're there to complete a task or do whatever they're doing in their everyday life. And obviously, we also live in a multicultural country. We live on Earth, in the world, and we're working with people that cross borders as well. So essentially, whatever we write, we want to make sure that anyone can understand that, and that the way that they understand it, whether it be like a screen reader or other program that they're using, is able to pick up the context and concept of what we're trying to put across. Sorry, I'm like thinking as I'm talking at the same time. So by making that content easy to read, we want to make sure that everyone has equal access to the information and services that we're providing. I think next one. Yeah. Oh, yes. And I think I already mentioned the scammers. It was SBS Australia that came out with a study a few years ago that actually said that people with English as a second language are being targeted by scammers more often than others. Okay, so we work for a bank. There are regulations and there's compliance as well, and things that we have to kind of apply to our content as we're writing it. And as like in most industries, like there would be some sort of guidelines or guardrails that are there. A lot of the time that like copy that comes from legal or compliance is quite formal. It can be quite legally and wordy, but it is there for a reason, and it will be there to provide information about a product. It could be a disclaimer that we just have to show and we have no choice, we have to display it for our customers, or it might be about how something works or something like that. Sometimes we have leeway where we'll be able to work with legal and compliance and shorten it and make it a bit easier for someone to digest. Other times we may not be able to, and it literally has to be what it is. That's where like design can come in and help a lot of the time to show that in a way that still gives it like context for someone. But I'll show you an example soon. So it can sometimes be a little bit tricky for people to understand some of the wording that is within these disclaimers or that comes from legal or compliance. That is essentially our job as a content designer and a UX designer to build experiences and write the content that helps to make it easier for the customer to understand and put it into everyday language. So I'll show you an example. This is actually something that Beck and I worked on together. The one on the left is the one pre-test, and the one on the right is post-test. So this is a direct debit request service agreement. So you might have come across this in everyday life anyway, like with a gym membership or something like that. When someone direct debits your bank account, you need to like check a box so that they can direct debit your bank account, and they're allowed to do that. This particular one relates to a term deposit where the customer is opening a term deposit, and they're giving us permission to take out their money from their nominated bank account and deposit it into their new account that they're opening with us at Bankwest. The one on the left, obviously, it just shows a block of text that the customer needs to agree to. It's an agreement. We tested this with people, and they had no idea why we were showing them this and what the purpose was of that text there. So what we did with the content basically was just pull out the reason for it. We showed them, and we also gave them a summary of the information that they've provided us with the financial institution that it's coming out of, their account number. Obviously, this is all fake. This is not real customer information. Their name and the date and all that kind of stuff. That actually also has to be there for legal and compliance reasons. But you can see it's a bit of an uplift from the one on the left. And at least if, for example, if I was translating this as a 14-year-old kid for my parents, I would be able to digest what it says at the top in that subcopy and tell them what it's for, because as a 14-year-old kid, I probably wouldn't be able to understand the bottom part. So yeah, that's our first example. Did I miss anything? No. The next one we have is a little blurry, but that's okay. You get the gist of it. A few years back, Bankwest worked very closely with accessibility experts, and they came up with our visual T's and C's. So this was a bit of an uplift to, this one in particular is the Easy Transaction account. Obviously T's and C's usually come in Word format. This one was simplified in order to add an extra visual aid for people that are considering opening this bank account to understand what the written word is essentially saying. So anyone would be able to pick it up and have a look and kind of get the gist of it a bit better than just what the words would tell them that are on the page. Yes.
Cool. And then another way we've uplifted screens to improve our accessibility, this is a screen where people can ask to see their scheduled payments. So the screen on the left is not great. So the button is in the wrong spot for a screen reader, and there is a lot of text it's really small, and the links are actually really small and not easy for fat thumbs to click. So what we've done is we've taken the less is more approach. So the main action in the text was asking for a copy of their repeating payments. So we pulled that out, put it in a tile of its own, added a little blurb, and then moved the buttons down to the bottom of the page where a screen reader will be able to actually, tell what they are and not skipping over them. And then we also, a lot of the text there is about if they can't see a scheduled payment. So we made that a separate page that people can navigate to. So it's easier for people to digest the information that they want to find. And then what was next?
I think it's tips. Which, look, you might already know some of this stuff, but the content tips, maybe not everyone, maybe not. So you might notice yourself when you're speaking to someone who has English as a second language that you slow things down when you're talking to them. You might point at stuff to try and get your message across, and you might also use your hands to gesture a little bit or find another way to try and help them understand what you're trying to say. I feel like we can probably draw a little bit from that in order to help people with ESL access the content better. And by access, I mean understand as well. So, tip number 1, write simply, use short sentences and paragraphs, avoid catchphrases, jargon, acronyms, slang, and filler words. Maybe I'll tap. Yes, so get to the point quickly. When you write simply, you also would be getting to the point quickly, so you're reducing the cognitive load on the user. It's not as hard for them to grasp something if they're not working as hard to try and get the information with that language barrier. And the WCAG AAA level rating tells us to write for a 12 to 14-year-old average reading level. And that's because most people would have at least finished that kind of level of schooling. So it also gives people maybe that have someone in their family or someone that's supporting them or a friend or something translating for them to be able to understand that and help them as well if they do need that help. And also another one is to try and use inclusive language a little bit more too. So we're kind of phasing out the use of, we're phasing out the use of words like surname and maiden name, and in place using words like last name, which is a lot more inclusive.
And then I think one other thing just to really get the point across about the importance of accessible copy. The WA Deaf Society, which has been absorbed into another company now, they used to offer a Auslan translation service, so deaf people could go in, take their bills, take any letters they receive that they don't understand, and have someone sit there, read it, and translate it for them into Auslan. That service really shouldn't be needed. People should be able to pick up a credit card bill or a phone bill, understand what it is it's asking of them, and be able to pay their bill or pay their council rates or know exactly who they need to email about something. So using these tips just from the language side of things really, really helps people, especially because that service is now no longer available and people are going to be relying on young kids or older family members that are also struggling because they're just getting older. For the design side of things, again, these are probably really obvious to you, but we just really want to reiterate them. Don't overwhelm. So if there is a lot of text that you have to present, break it up into little buckets, use bullet points, use numbers, so the eye is able to flow across the page a lot easier. If there's sections of text that is talking about something different, make sure that is its own little section. Utilize those buckets. Utilize images and diagrams. Visual examples, as we saw with the visual T's and C's, are a really, really helpful way to display information to those who may struggle with language. And that's not just people who have English as a second language. That may just be people who struggle reading, fine print. But don't forget to add the alt text to those images for people with screen readers. Use the correct colour contrast, so follow the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines on colour and contrast. Try to meet AA standards at a minimum. At Bankwest, we try and meet AAA. wherever we can. And then test. So find an audience that will give you feedback and make sure it's easy for them to provide that feedback. So at Bankwest, when we're testing with people, we do our best to test with people who have a wide range of financial literacy. So we ask people to self-grade themselves on their financial literacy, and you'll find that people will either grade themselves really high or really low. They're probably wrong because people really either underestimate or overestimate their abilities. But we ask that so we can really make sure that the content that we're putting out is understandable to 99% of people, hopefully, anyway. So before we wrap up, we also just had some things that we wanted to put back to you and have you have a think about, I guess. Oh no, we had helpful resources. Oh, yeah. Oops.
They're literally just there. If you ever find yourself a little bit stuck and you're not sure if the copy that you're writing is accessible or of around about 14-year-old age level, you can use Hemingway, Fletcher Kincaid calculator, and also so those ones will probably give you a result for that. And Grammarly as well is quite helpful when you're writing things if you're not a content designer or copywriter off the bat. So we wanted to ask you guys some questions. So based on what we've spoken about today and your own experiences with accessibility, what do you think the future looks like for accessible content? So in the past, it's been people are relying on family members. Currently, people use Google Translate. If you're on Google Chrome and you're on a website that's in a foreign language, you get a little pop-up and it says we can translate this into English for you. And obviously AI is growing. So the future looks like it's going to be a lot of AI, a lot of chatbots, but how does that look? And I guess we wanted you to consider that in your work, how would this work with AI? How would this work with chatbots? Are there any challenges for the future of accessible content? So tech can make things easier, but can also present new challenges, especially with AI. We've all had a weird ChatGPT experience. And then are future systems equipped to help people who have English as a second language? So thinking back to that letter that my mum wrote that I showed you earlier, if she wrote a question the way she normally writes and wrote that into ChatGPT or into a chatbot, would that chatbot be equipped to actually understand what she's trying to say? And would it be able to reply to her in a way that she would be able to understand? So, yeah, that's basically it. But those are our questions for you guys. Thanks.